I'd always been drawn to Chicago's history, so when I found myself there for a work trip, I couldn't resist booking a room in one of the city's oldest hotels, a place rumored to have seen its fair share of scandal, mystery, and tragedy. The lobby was stunning, all Art Deco elegance, like stepping straight back into the Roaring Twenties. Polished marble floors, grand chandeliers, and the kind of atmosphere that felt thick with forgotten stories. The hotel staff were polite, but there was an odd distance to them. When I asked for recommendations on local ghost tours, or if they had any stories of their own, they just chuckled, shook their heads, and hurried me along. Their reaction only made me more curious. It wasn't long before I started noticing the small things, whispers between the staff, doors that never seemed to be opened, and an elevator that I was warned not to use after midnight. I laughed it off. Hotels like this were bound to have their ghost stories, and I figured it was part of the charm. The room they gave me was on the top floor, an older suite that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1920s. Even the furniture seemed antique, as though it had been preserved in time. Dark wood dressers, an old vanity, and heavy velvet curtains that felt out of place in the 21st century. It was beautiful, but something about the room felt off, like the air was heavier than it should have been. Still, I chalked it up to the age of the building. History has a way of clinging to old places, right? The first night passed without incident. I explored the city during the day, and when I returned to the hotel that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. My room felt colder, almost unnaturally so despite the heat outside. As I closed the door behind me, I heard the soft click of the lock and then a faint humming. At first, I thought it was coming from the hallway, maybe a guest down the hall playing music. But no, it wasn't that. The humming was soft, melodic, and distinctly old-fashioned. It reminded me of an old jazz tune, the kind you'd hear in a smoky speakeasy. I stood still, listening, but the sound seemed to fade the moment I focused on it. Brushing it off, I settled into bed, trying to convince myself that it was just the old pipes or some weird acoustic effect of the building. But then, around 1 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps, light, delicate footsteps, pacing the hallway outside my door. I sat up, listening as they moved closer, slow and measured. Whoever it was, they weren't in a hurry. I stared at the door, half expecting someone to knock, but the footsteps passed by, continuing down the hallway. I waited a moment, holding my breath before cautiously opening the door. The hallway was empty. The soft carpet would have muffled most footsteps, but I knew what I'd heard. I closed the door quickly, suddenly feeling exposed. The humming started again, this time louder, like it was coming from within the room itself. And then I saw her. Standing near the window, half hidden in the shadow of the heavy curtains, was a woman. She looked out of place, like she had stepped straight out of an old photograph. She wore a flapper dress, deep red, covered in sequins that caught the dim light. Her hair was styled in soft waves, pinned with a jeweled headband. She was beautiful, but there was something unsettling about her, something that made my skin crawl. She didn't seem to notice me at first. Her head was tilted slightly, and she continued to hum that haunting melody, swaying gently as if lost in a world that wasn't mine. I was frozen, staring at her, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to move, to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Suddenly she turned to face me, her eyes locked onto mine, and in that moment, the room seemed to drop in temperature. Her expression was unreadable, cold, distant, as though she was looking right through me. But her eyes, they were full of something else. Sadness? Anger? I couldn't tell, but whatever it was powerful, and it held me in place. She took a step forward, and the humming stopped. The silence was suffocating. I tried to speak, but the words stuck in my throat. My mouth was dry, and I could feel the weight of her gaze pressing down on me. She took another step, her heels clicking softly on the floor, and I noticed that her dress wasn't quite right. The fabric seemed torn in places, dark stains creeping up the hem as though she had been caught in something terrible. Finally, I found my voice. "Who are you?" I whispered, barely able to get the words out. She didn't answer. Instead, she raised her hand, pointing toward the corner of the room, toward the vanity. I followed her gaze, my stomach twisting as I saw the mirror on the vanity was fogged over, as though someone had been breathing on it. And there, written in the condensation, was a single word: secrets. I looked back at her, but she was already gone. The room was empty, the air still cold, but the sense of her presence lingered like a shadow. The rest of the night passed in a blur of restless sleep and unease. I left the hotel early the next morning, unable to shake the image of her standing there, so out of place yet so real. Before I checked out, I asked the front desk about the history of the hotel, trying to sound casual, but they just gave me the same distant look. "You're not the first to ask about her," the clerk said quietly, glancing around as if he didn't want anyone else to hear. "They say she was a lounge singer back in the 1920s. She had an affair with a wealthy man who used to stay here. When she got pregnant, he wanted nothing to do with her. One night after a performance, she came back to the hotel and, well, she never left." I didn't need to ask how it happened. The stains on her dress, the sadness in her eyes, it all made sense. I never went back to that hotel. But sometimes, late at night, when I hear a faint melody drifting through the air, I wonder if she's still there, waiting for someone to help her, or maybe just to remember her.